Okay, here we go. There's Asad. I'm not sure if there's supposed to be a little video about the MICA mission, but maybe that's at the end, like the previous session. But so I guess we'll just get started. My name is Dave Fike. I'm the director at the MICA mission, and we'll do that video whenever it shows up, I guess. But we're here to hear our friend Dr. Muhammad Asadullah to share with us about a research project that he's been part of, and I'm looking forward to it because yeah, we were part of that research project too. So, but you have the bio about him, but I'll just share a little bit of that. He's an assistant professor at the University of Regina, Department of Justice Studies. Prior to joining the U of R, he taught at Simon Fraser University, University of the Fraser Valley, and Kwantlen Polytechnic University. He's a recipient of multiple awards and scholarships, and I hope you don't mind if I don't read all of those for you. But Asadullah is deeply grateful to the elders in Treaty Fort territory who guided him to walk on this land with humility and respect. I'd like to add that we know him as Asad. We've gotten to know him that way. And we first met in our Saskatchewan Restorative Justice Network, I think as we began meeting virtually back in March or April of last year. Still waiting to meet Asad in person, so hopefully that will happen one day. One important thing that he didn't mention in his bio is the fact that he studied under the person who's considered to be the grandfather of restorative justice, Howard Zehr, at Eastern Mennonite University. So I think that's an important thing to be mindful of. So yes, Asad will be sharing a report on exploring Indigenous justice and restorative justice in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. And as I said, our organization was privileged to be part of that in a number of different ways. So I want to give him as much time as he needs, but I'll be watching the clock, and I think they're giving you just about a full hour. So about 12 o'clock, I'll be making sure that if you haven't stopped by then, that we'll be wanting to give time for 15 minutes or so for questions as well. So thank you, Asad, for being here and for being willing to share your information. He just led a conference out of the U of R on Thursday of this week, and so it was good to be part of that as well. So, but looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So please, Asad.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you all, Kelly Bird, Nancy, and the tech support. I don't know your name, but Rick, Gary, Phyllis, Andy, I can see Steve here, Dennis, all of you. Thank you so much for joining today. And this is Saturday, and it shows your commitment and sincerity and dedication that you are here in this conference for peace building, for any areas that you are passionate about. And thank you, Dave, for the introduction and for your kind words. And for the next, I guess, an hour and 10 minutes, what I will do, I will share the findings from the report that we have, a specific project that myself and Dave and his team from my commission and some of my colleagues from BC, we did together. And also I add some, because sharing report itself is not something that is interactive in nature. So I was thinking to share my own journey of restorative justice. Dave mentioned a little bit like what is the kind of genesis of my journey to restorative justice, and I will be curious to hear some from you if you're okay with that. Maybe a few minutes we can hear from each other if we have time. I guess we can allocate some time for it, Dave, if you're okay with that. And then I will share the findings and then some of. So the way our study design, or I can share my slide here as if you can see. So this is the title of my presentation, which is also included in the poster or agenda. And then this is more like a kind of the whole presentation that I had, background, research method, what are the, like we have two specific methods that I wanted to share with you. One is more what we call decolonizing research method, and the other is community action research. Those are the two major items which are different than a traditional research. And then some findings, like what we call general findings on indigenous-led justice practices and restorative justice, and some of the emergent findings which were not a kind of direct response from our research question, which just emerged during the discussions with our wonderful research participants in BC and Saskatchewan. And then obviously a conclusion and a summary. So I hope, like, I will include some engagement where we will hear from each other, and then in between the sharing, I'll be happy to if you have any questions for clarification, I'll be happy to have it as well. So about my journey of restorative justice. So this is I have a slide for it. So when I was studying, I was doing my master's in the US at Eastern Mennonite University. And I had nothing but good things about Mennonites and MCC, obviously. I got introduced to MCC's work in Bangladesh long time ago, and they are the instrumental peace building organization in Bangladesh. That's my ancestral land. And so Pushpi was also a graduate student like me. Pushpi was from Sri Lanka, and obviously I was from Bangladesh, and we were studying in this particular program called Masters in Conflict Transformation in the Department of Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And as a part of Pushpi's assignment, Pushpi was kind of interviewing incoming graduate students and then just asking them, what do you know about restorative justice? And then most of the time they will say, I have no idea, or I have limited knowledge, or I hardly know anything. So Pushpi did. So Pushpi was in Howard Zaher's class, and one of the assignment was explaining restorative justice to those who do not know. So Pushpi just got me on the hallway at CJP, Center for Justice and Peace Building, and asked me, Asad, what do you know about restorative justice? And I said, it's something with restoration, something with restoring law, something with, I had no knowledge, I can say. So then Pushpi obviously introduced me, this is what restorative justice, and that provoked lots of curiosity in me. And at the time, I had idea that Howard Zaher was a faculty member, but I never met him during, at that point. I also didn't take any class with him. So, but Pushpi's introduction really created lots of curiosity. So I took a kind of a weekend class with Howard Zaher, and that weekend class was hugely influential. I felt when I went to EMU, my goal was on strategic peace building. How do you have a peace building process where you help a specific, like we had in Bangladesh, there was unfortunately a conflict between the government of Bangladesh and its indigenous population for almost 30 years. And my goal was a kind of top-down peace building approach, what can be done where government can do something. But Pushpi's introduction and then Howard's class really shook me fully, and then in a positive way. And then I took more classes with him and more classes with him. And then I ended up shifting fully from strategic peace building towards restorative justice. And then unfortunately, I didn't have enough credit to take all other courses. So I was auditing all Howard Zaher's. And there was another professor, Carl Stauffer, who just came from South Africa, working with TRC, and then also took classes with Carl Stauffer. And then Lorraine from MCC, like Central Committee, Lorraine, she was also teaching victim fundamental. So I was fortunate to take all of those classes with them. And then when I finished my master's, so I did my master's thesis on a project called Active Listening, where Howard Zaher guided me to do some active listening project with some indigenous elders in Bangladesh. And then later on, I wanted to continue. Howard suggested me, you can go to Canada and study with Liz, a very good friend of Howard Zaher at SFU, Simon Fraser University. And so I emailed Liz. So Howard Zaher introduced me with Liz, and then I emailed her that I want to study with you sometimes in early 2012. And during that time, Howard Zaher, when I was introduced to Liz, unfortunately, she was suffering from cancer and she was very ill. And she just sent me an email and then told me that I am connecting you with Brenda, and Brenda, because I'm very sick, And then obviously from there, this is Brenda Morrison. And then I replied Liz, and then I got, unfortunately, an automatic response that Liz passed away. So I never met Liz Elliott, who I call her a grandmother of restorative justice, and Howard Zehr is like a grandfather. And so Liz was the reason why I came to Canada, but obviously I never met her. And then Brenda became my supervisor in my master's program. And then later on, for my master's, my focus for restorative justice was how do we apply restorative justice in the context of war crime and genocide. So I studied what happened to Rwanda, what happened to Cambodia, and then in Bangladesh in 1971, there was a genocide where approximately 2 to 3 million people were killed during that independence war. And government had a policy of blanket amnesty and forgiveness. Unfortunately, that didn't work. And then in 2009, a new government came and they wanted to apply what they call a kind of victor's justice. This is Desmond Tutu's version. According to Desmond Tutu, one is obviously blanket amnesty, unfortunately, or amnesty without condition. That unfortunately didn't work anywhere. So that contributed a major difficulties, polarization, trauma, all of it. And then this current government, which came in power in 2009, they started a punitive process and unfortunately started arresting opposition leaders and giving death sentences after death sentences after death sentences. So many people died. So that was my study for my master's. And then for my PhD, what I did, I shifted a little bit and then I wanted to see the genesis of restorative justice in BC and Nova Scotia. And then that became a part of my PhD. And also what happened to Bangladesh with regard to restorative justice. And so that continued. So after finishing my PhD in 2009, I moved to Regina. In July, I was fortunate to have a position before my PhD thesis done. And the department was very kind to hire me as one of their faculty members. And as of today, I am feeling lots of support. And then my work in the department is more with restorative justice and conflict resolution. And I was also fortunate to have funding and support from the university, from the Ministry of Justice in BC, and also from Saskatchewan in general. So this is a kind of long journey of my restorative justice, and it's still going. And in my heart, restorative justice lens is something very personal to me because it had huge impact to nurture my relationship with my younger brother, where I had difficulties. It also had a huge impact on my relationships with my father and also with my wife. This relational lens of restorative justice is deeply appealing for me. It's not just a theory that I teach. This also has personal impact. The harm that I had as a big brother to my younger brother, I didn't know how to deal with it. As a big brother, unfortunately, I was the bully, and acknowledging those mistakes. And then it took obviously lots of time, 4 or 5 years to repair that relationships. So when I will share, obviously I will share some academic findings, but I think the most wonderful part of restorative justice is it's also deeply personal. It has that everyday life component, like you and your relationship with yourself, you and your relationship with the people around you, with your relatives and cousins and workplace stuff, and also obviously your spouse or your loved one. So again, for the sake of time, I will share the research project. So this particular research project emerged between myself and a colleague of mine in BC. Her name is Dr. Alana Abramson. She is right now, you can call it the most, I guess, talented young RJ academic practitioner. She did her PhD at the same university where I did. And she was also influenced by same restorative justice lens. Like there are multiple camps within the field of restorative justice. One is like more, they think restorative justice can be done from all community, government, all of it. And there are some folks who are a kind of Howard Zehr understanding, where we see restorative justice should be community-based, community-led, community control. So that's a huge in me and also in Alana. So we became good friends, and then we saw that there is unfortunately a gap between restorative justice practitioners and Indigenous-led justice practices, or restorative justice and Indigenous justice in our experience in BC. I was in BC at the time before I moved to Regina, and unfortunately that led some confusion, misunderstandings. Not only that, in BC, there is a different associations. Restorative Justice Association of BC is one, And there is also Indigenous Justice Associations, which is different, unfortunately. So that division, unfortunately, became more and more. And so I will just go back to my slide quickly. So what I did, you can see this is the funding. So this particular project was funded by the Ministry of Justice in BC, and from their crime reduction response program. And they had like a significant amount of money, almost $1 million, and they gave us generous funding. So in our literature review, what we did, we studied what does justice mean. For example, in our morning address, you had a discussion on the biblical understanding of justice. So in our literature review, we had these 3 rivers of justice. One is what we call justice from an Indigenous worldview. It's more healing, and so the healing is significant, and there are some work you can see. Rupert Ross, Jeremy Swansky, I guess he has also a significant Mennonite background. His work on justice and restorative justice, and John Borrows, all of their work is contributed that part of literature. And then we have restorative, like in general, restorative justice, which is, as you can see, the last one, Neil Christie, Liz Elliott, Jennifer Llewellyn, Dr. Morrison, and Kay Prentice, obviously Howard Zahir, all of their work contributed to the idea what is restorative justice as restoration, or justice as restoration, so relationships building. And then you have in between is like a nation state-centric understanding of justice, justice as fairness. So it's from John Rawls, 1971, to recently Dr. Sen, who got Nobel Prize for, I think, economics many years ago. So their work on the idea of justice also played a huge role. So it was all part of our literature review. So we did that, and then we found that there are these 3 rivers of justice. And in the section on justice as healing, we had some section on like Islamic worldviews on justice, Jewish worldviews on justice, and Christian worldviews on justice. There are so many resonance with those idea of healing. As in the morning speaker, she mentioned about how the notion of sadaqah and also other words, the justice word in Hebrew and also in Islam, in Arabic, in other languages, there are a lot of, I guess, notion of healing. We had some of those in our literature review. And then obviously, what is restorative justice? I don't have to teach here in detail. So Neil Christie's article in 1977, I think that was the significant move. That is like a first documented article. Neil Christie, he is a critical criminologist. He saw how justice system is not working, prison system is not working. He's a Norwegian. So his article, Conflict as a Property of the Community, played a huge role in the field of restorative justice. And he mentioned lawyers and police officers. They're like professional thieves. They came, stole conflict from us. Now we don't know how to deal with it. And our judge from UConn, Judge Barry Stewart, he called it, now we have 911 mentality. We call 911 because we don't know how to deal with conflict. And then Albert Eglash, he coined the term restorative justice around the same time, 1977. Zahir's book played this like a kind of monumental role in terms of movement. And Liz Elliott, obviously, her role in Canada, I see her as an extraordinary visionary in the growth of restorative justice. So this is, I'm not going in detail. So this is more restorative justice in Canada. Like there are some dates. You can see Elmira case, which is in Waterloo, Kitchener. I will not, many of you know this Genesis story. This is a Genesis story of restorative justice, not just in Canada, in the world. It's the first documented case where 2 young men, they vandalized multiple houses. And that vandalization, they didn't have any criminal report. And their probation officer thought that these 2 young men, they did some stupid work. They were bored. They just did something out of their boredomness. So if I send them to the court, they will be revolving door. They will come back and they will go back. They will come back, they will go back. So he wanted to see something different. So he consulted with MCC staff, as usual, Mennonite Central Committees, one of the staffs in Waterloo, Kitchener, and then both of them created a process. I will not go in detail. That process at that time became what we call Victim Offender Reconciliation Program, and that became Victim Offender Program, and that is now one of the signature programs in the world right now. I think more than 100 countries, they have this victim offender mediation. So that took a huge, I guess, ripple effects all over the world. 1988, in our House of Commons Standing Committee, David Dobney, he is a conservative senator, he wrote a report, and in the report, he strongly recommended restorative justice as a process or as an alternative to address the dysfunctions we are seeing in the criminal justice system. And I think the most important legal framework or legal landmark we had in Canadian context is Bill C-41 that resulted in Section 718 of Criminal Code, where you have explicit mandate or recommendation to police officer and law enforcement agencies that they, if there is any first-time young offender or I guess minor offenses, they should strongly, I guess, look for alternative measure programs and all those community-based programs. And that had ripple effects all over the country, all provinces. I think the provincial government, they took Section 718 seriously. RCMP and provincial law enforcement agencies, they took those Section 718 very seriously, and that resulted in many policies that you see in BC and Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, all other provinces. And then Supreme Court's cases, there are multiple cases, landmark cases, including R versus Gladue. Those cases also played a huge, I guess, legal framework. And then finally, Youth Justice Act in 2003 that has multiple sections. They mentioned that alternative measures, restorative justice should be the top priority for dealing with minor offenses and justice work, and also primarily minor offenses and youth and first-time young offender, all of it. So all those played obviously an amazing impact. And then here is more, even though I'm coming to this section later on. So restorative justice in BC. So we have in our literature for this, the kind of genesis story of RJ in BC. So again, Langley Meroneth Fellowship in 1980s, they hire somebody from Indiana, and then the pastor Dave Gustafson, he planted the seed there, and then that became Community Justice Forum, the Community Justice Initiative, CJI. And then 1997, you can see immediately after the Section 718 of Criminal Code, multiple provinces, their attorney generals, they really wanted to do with restorative justice. So as a result in BC, the then Attorney General Ujjal Dejan, he created this community accountability program where he had funding for all community-based agencies. So suddenly in BC, they saw more than 50 programs emerged out of this program. And then right now, overall, like 80 plus organizations we have in BC. And I guess the final genesis story of RJ in BC is Restorative Justice Association of British Columbia, which is more like an umbrella organizations of all the RJ organizations that was in 2009. And this is RJ in Saskatchewan. So since 1985, we have alternative measure programs supported by provincial government. And again, also we have 80 plus organizations all over the country, all over the province that are providing justice programs. And the gaps we saw in our literature is unfortunately significant. Like the term between restorative justice and Indigenous justice, there is a lot of confusion among academics. What does restorative justice mean? What does Indigenous justice mean? A lot of confusion. And also sometimes they use the word interchangeably. If I ask them, how do you define restorative justice? Many academics, they're defining restorative justice. If you want to know what is Indigenous justice, they're defining restorative justice. So there is a lot of, I guess, interchangeable way of using those words, and also limited. We only had this research. You can see Charter and Horn. When we started this particular research project, we only had her article, and she explicitly mentioned there are similarities, but there are significant differences between restorative justice and Indigenous justice. And this is maybe one of the very few, maybe the only one article we saw in Canadian context. So that prompted our study and then our research question. And we used, I will spend, let's see, how much time do I have? 17 minutes. So research method, as you can see, we have 26 interviews, 17 from BC. These are all in-depth qualitative interviews. Our plan is to meet them in person, but because of COVID, we all interviewed them virtually. And then 9 from Saskatchewan. And then we have 28 focus group discussions where we invited community members. So for example, we had 3 communities in Saskatchewan, 5 in BC. So in these 3 communities, we had 4 virtual gatherings. So total 12 in Saskatchewan and rest in BC. So from these virtual gatherings, we call them as focus group discussions. We had some themes: restorative justice, Indigenous justice, what are the similarities, and what needs to happen to, I guess, to address this confusion, to address this problem. So these are our findings. I don't know whether you are interested to explore methods. So this is our method. We use decolonizing research method, and the reason why we use it is because there are a lot of. I will pause it because I will not go in detail about method, because if you are interested, I think I will keep some question at the 5 minutes at the end. Then you can ask if you're curious to know about method section, because this is more if you're interested in research, but I will just skip it for now. So this is there are 3 major findings about the similarities and differences between restorative justice and Indigenous justice. Like a number of people in BC and Saskatchewan, they see it's same. Like the way we found in our academic literature, many of them see it is same. And some of them see that restorative justice and Indigenous not same, but they complement each other. For example, here, as you can see here, one of the participants mentioned that both RJ and IJ address harm done by individual people, both acknowledge the importance of relationships and both recognize that the other system doesn't work. And I also said that both kind of recognize that not only the victim-centered, but also community. So community-centeredness, voluntariness, and then harm, relationships, accountability, all these according to this particular like research participants from Saskatchewan, according to him or her, like all these are commonalities that shows RJ and IJ and same. And this is an interesting quote from one of our participants in BC. He said, what is the difference between chocolate and vanilla ice cream? It's same. So according to them, they see restorative justice and Indigenous justice as same. They don't see that these are fundamentally different. Those who sees complementary, as you can see, restorative justice is the bridge between legal adjudication to traditional Indigenous justice process. So a number of participants from BC and Saskatchewan, they see restorative justice is a kind of bridge between our state-based justice and community-based justice, like transitioning to community. And that number in our study in BC and Saskatchewan, I think they see more, it is a kind of blended complementary process than different. And there are also, I should not say a significant, but a large number of participants, they see it is fundamentally different because of different worldviews, ceremonies, traditions, and stories, and also process. So Indigenous justice is a soul-driven process, and restorative justice is a time-bound, time-limited process. And they also shared a lot of differences, and I will not share in. And then another findings, another area that we asked them, what are the natures of relationships, or what, especially in the areas of service. And so one of the difficulties that they mention is restorative justice and Indigenous justice. There are a lot of people who are working their silos. They do not know what is happening, for example, in Saskatoon and Regina and Moose Jaw. There are disconnection. Same way in BC, what is happening in, for example, in Surrey, folks in Burnaby or North Vancouver or West Vancouver do not know. So what they realize, or in other areas, in remote areas in BC or remote areas in Saskatchewan. So that silos is one of the huge gaps, so that need to be addressed. And justice, so for example, in RCMP, in provincial law enforcement agencies, there is a lot of turnover. So for example, one of the restorative justice liaison who is working with, for example, my commission, if that person leaves, a new person is emerging. So building relationships, making sure that person has some understanding of justice, all of it, a lot of time contributes misunderstanding and contribute more silos and challenges. And in terms of funding and resources, this is the next one. Another gaps, or I guess issues we had with regard to Indigenous justice and restorative justice. As you can see, funding criteria itself. So in the context of BC, community accountability program, they have specific funding criteria to get funding. And if it is not minor offenses, if it is, there is some time limit. And if you want to, because the path of healing takes time. And our community members in Saskatchewan, they mentioned that funding criteria from the government itself is limiting because it doesn't allow to have a process which is lengthy, which focuses on healing and a long-term solution. So that was a huge also in BC. Insufficient funding, it came multiple times from both BC and Saskatchewan. And what needs to happen, so to address these issues, obviously education, awareness, creating more awareness about restorative justice and Indigenous justice became very, very strong in our study, and top-down support from a lot of time, both BC and Saskatchewan, they mentioned like politician, government, and other agencies, lawyers and judges, if they offer supports, that has ripple effects. It really move. And some of them mentioned what is happening in Nova Scotia, how the top-down officials like the RCMP, from the politicians, judges, and then academics, all of them are supporting restorative justice, and that automatically has ripple effects in the community. So that was also mentioned. And building relationships is huge. In Saskatchewan, our research participants, they shared that we need a justice or interagency hub where, and there is a hub in Saskatchewan, but we didn't see that in BC. So there is that need of hub where all justice stakeholders can come and learn from each other and then share what is happening. If there is a new difficulties or issues, they can come and then collectively explore what can be done to address these particular issues from a restorative justice lens. Collaboration, communicating with each other, sharing, all these are important. And this is more emergent findings. So colonization came multiple times, the impact of colonization, how it affected justice system, especially among Indigenous people. So one of the quotes, as you can see here, I always go back and look all the way to colonization, how it has affected our people, our lives, our livelihood. And if we can address those by bringing all of things what we lost, how to communicate, how to be in relationships, how to work together, deal with the trauma past and what is still going on, that will be a huge job. So as you can see, acknowledging historical harms, colonization, impact of colonization also came multiple times. And that leads towards the kind of decolonizing the justice system. There are multiple themes emerged, like what can be done to decolonize justice system. One of the elders, one of the participants from Saskatchewan, he mentioned colonization was tough, decolonization will be even tougher. So that was his quote. And then, as you can see, an Indigenous law, Indigenous way of knowing, and the process is what we need to blend to restorative justice. So you can see in this particular model, it is more, they see decolonization is a blended process where you can incorporate some of those ceremonies and rituals, and that blending itself can contribute to decolonization process. And then also support a full-fledged Indigenous justice system. One of the participants from Saskatchewan, he mentioned that for Cree people, we need Cree justice system. For Haida people, we need Haida justice system. For Tsleil-Waututh people in BC, we need Tsleil-Waututh justice system. So that Indigenous justice system also can be a part and parcel of decolonizing justice process. So, and then in our discussion and analysis, we have three major, like accordingly. So what we did in our discussion is we see what are the major themes, and then we try to have like add more literature. So one is obviously colonization was a huge part, decolonization was a huge part. And then what we did, this is a kind of what we found 3 camps in literature. So in discussion, we synthesize what we have from findings and also from existing literatures. There are, at this moment, there are 3 camps in the field of decolonization. One camp, according to them, they see restorative justice as an extension of criminal justice system. It is, they do not see restorative justice as a solution to dysfunctionality of our justice system. They see more as an extension. And arguments they give is, even though restorative justice programs are mushrooming all over the country, all like both in Saskatchewan and BC, but the percentage of Indigenous peoples in the justice system didn't change since maybe for the last 20 years. It's the number and the amount is almost statistically insignificant, unfortunately. So, and they also mention how the programs are run in multiple provinces where justice agencies, police agencies, lawyers, and a lot of time community-based organizations, but they may not be necessarily connected with the serving community. So they see that as a more extension, not as a solution or as an alternative. Second camp, they see decolonizing restorative justice means we need to support for sovereign Indigenous justice system. And these groups are very strong. And this particular paradigm, or I guess idea of decolonizing restorative justice emerged from an amazing researcher or an academic and also a Maori scholar in New Zealand. His name is Dr. Wantauri, and another scholar whose name is Chris Canine from Australia. And in Canadian context, we have a scholar in Kwantlen Polytechnic University. She's the first Indigenous woman who had a PhD in criminology, Lisa Monchalin. And then another PhD student, she is still in her PhD. She's a Haida scholar, Michaela McGuire. So according to them, Decolonizing restorative justice means nothing but supporting sovereign indigenous justice system. Restorative justice and indigenous justice system are fundamentally different, are not same. And this is, and this camp, as you can see, completely to the other spectrum, to the last one, which is the number 3. Many people in our research and also in literature, what we found, they see RJ and indigenous justice same. A blended approach can be a decolonizing approach. This is also so. In my last slide, what I will share is I have in my PhD thesis, I also encountered the same issues. What happened to restorative justice in Bangladesh, and that resulted in this decolonizing tree framework. So this is my own theory that I published from my PhD work. So in my understanding, decolonization or decolonizing restorative justice can happen in this, like if you follow this tree model. One is the roots. So if the foundation of that practice must be do no harm policy, must have a do no harm policy, it must have a trauma-informed practice. And then the trunk, the leadership of that organization must be community-led, community-based, and community-controlled. And in my theory or in my proposed framework, what I suggested, for example, if there is a restorative justice program in Saskatchewan, and then we would like to see who are the recipients of RJ program. If our primary recipients are Indian Canadian, we need to make sure that we have Indian Canadians who are taking the major, like who are the community-based community leader taking decisions, not just Eurocentric Canadians. If you have primary recipients or from Indigenous community, leadership must be also from Indigenous community. If your program is in Surrey in British Columbia, you have a lot of Punjabi, Sikh, Canadian. Do you have representative from them in the leadership? And then the branches is learning, where I suggested the specific restorative justice program need to learn from the similar practices. For example, if you want to implement a restorative justice program in Surrey, you need to learn the culture and ethos and relationships and spiritualities from those Punjabi Canadian perspectives. What is going on in India, for example? Do you have any specific RJ practices in India that you can learn from? If you have specific justice practices in one of the, for example, in Saskatchewan Tribal Council, can we learn what is going on in Haida Nation rather than what is going on in North Shore Restorative Justice, which is more Eurocentric worldviews of justice and restorative justice. So that mutual learning help to implement what we call culturally, socially, spiritually grounded restorative justice practice. So this is my own theory. I think that can avoid what we call McDonaldization of restorative justice, copying and pasting of restorative justice, or a colonial way of restorative justice. What many RJ practitioners, they really believe that unfortunately restorative justice became an agent for the nation state to implement and to do more harm. And there are some, unfortunately, major studies from Australia and New Zealand coming recently by major scholars from Cambridge. And what they're finding, restorative justice unfortunately harmed Indigenous peoples in Australia and harmed Indigenous peoples in New Zealand, because number one, it was not socially, culturally, spiritually grounded. Number two, consultations didn't happen. Number three, unfortunately, those practices were more copying and pasted instead of seeing the relevancy of those programs. Limitations, obviously, because of COVID, we didn't have, we wanted to have face-to-face, but unfortunately that didn't happen because of COVID restrictions and all of it. And we also needed more funding. We had limitations because we wanted more funding so that we can give it to community. And obviously, if we had more participants, that would have been wonderful. I have 1 minute and 53 seconds.
Yeah, we thought that we could actually go into the lunch break, but now Mark is telling me that that may not be possible either. But are there any quick questions that anybody has? I know that our experience with Asad and his group was really a wonderful time of getting to know some of the other agencies and partners in the community or in the province, and having some good conversations around the fact that, as was mentioned, that we feel like we're in silos and each trying to do our own thing, and there's overlap and there's gaps. And so even having these conversations that Asad initiated certainly has helped us to at least get to know each other a little better, and we're looking forward to following up on some of those as well. So So yeah, it was, and I appreciate your starting us off with a circle too. I mean, that's a big part of restorative justice, is giving people all the opportunity to share their story. And that's something that I've learned a lot from Kelly working with me here the last while too, is how important that is to know who it is we're talking to, and where we come from, and all of that. So thank you, Asad, for rushing through your report, but also for sharing that that there's a lot of good stuff happening and yeah.
Thank you so much. So sorry for rushing, because this is unfortunately, I really wanted to have some quality sharing, and then we will be done in 4 seconds, I guess. So